All right, hello out there. This is Mike McCormick, and I'm joined today with a very special guest, Sheldon Lettich, whose wonderful career that he's captured in a new book, From Vietnam to Van Damme.
Right.
I'd kind of like to go back and just talk about you. We're always talking about, you know, the stars and whatnot, but I'd like to talk about you and your road to being such a successful producer, writer, director. And I understand that you were in the Marines for 4 years. Is that correct?
Right. Just shy of 4 years, because I actually got out on a medical discharge. I had a problem with my heart, which they discovered after I'd been in the Marines for 3.5 years. So I actually got out a little bit early. So it wasn't quite 4 years, but close enough.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so that gave me a lot of insight into what it's like to be in a war zone, what it's like to be a soldier. And I've used that in quite a few of my films, actually, because I've done all these action films. And
yes, sir.
That's how I ended up getting to co-write Rambo III with Stallone. I got to give Stallone credit, because he was looking for a writer to work on Rambo III with him. And he got an actual veteran, somebody who actually had been in Vietnam, so somebody could actually relate to John Rambo and have an understanding as to what would motivate him and how he'd be thinking about things. And that actually crept into the screenplay, and actually in a kind of a big way, because Stallone and I had agreed that Afghanistan was the perfect battleground for Rambo, for a third Rambo film. And we had no problem with that. In fact, it was just logical that if you're going to do a third Rambo movie, at the time, the Soviets were in Afghanistan, and the U.S. was surreptitiously sending aid to the Afghan rebels. So it was just a perfect, really a perfect battleground for Rambo. What Stallone's first idea was, we both agreed that Troutman would be the one who enticed Rambo into helping out in Afghanistan. But the way Sly looked at it was that Troutman comes to Rambo and says, "Hey, Johnny, I need some help in Afghanistan. I need to take them some military supplies." And that Rambo would just say, "Well, John, let me just go get my gear, okay, and I'll join you." And my feeling was that Rambo had been through so much already. This is a veteran with some PTSD issues, which were explored in the first one, in First Blood. In the second Rambo, they didn't really get into that all that much. But this is a guy with some issues, because he's been through so much. He's been through so much war and killing and bloodshed and all of that, that the last thing he wants to do, this is a guy we've established that this is one of the baddest motherfuckers in the world, but he doesn't want to fight anymore. He doesn't want to be in a war zone. He doesn't want to pick up a weapon and shoot people. He doesn't want to be shot at by other people. So my feeling, and I felt very strongly about this, was that he would not want to go. He'd say, "Sam, I appreciate the fact that you need my help, and I'd love to help you, but I just can't handle this anymore. I just can't do this. My war is over." I believe we used that line in the film. And that ended up being a big part of the story, a big part of the plot, was the fact that Rambo doesn't volunteer, in fact doesn't want to even go with Troutman to Afghanistan. And he knows it's going to be a dangerous situation, but he's just not ready to go back and deal with that.
Yeah.
So Troutman ends up going on his own, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. He probably would have been with, he would have found somebody else to go with him, to accompany him. But he goes on his own, and he's captured by the Soviets. And so now we've got Rambo feeling kind of responsible for this, feeling guilty. My best friend in the world, who is Colonel Troutman, comes to me, asks for help. I turn him down. Now he's captured by the Soviets. So I don't know if he's alive or dead, but basically I got him into this situation. I need to go get him out of it. So now he goes on his own, basically goes to the CIA, and they get him in there. He's feeling responsible for this. So that's his motivation to go to Afghanistan. It's not to help the rebels. It's not out of patriotic necessity or duty. He's going there just to rescue his friend, or to do what he can to get Troutman out of that situation. So
Right.
that's what I pretty much brought that to the story, and that was very important because it ends up being the crux of the plot. The fact that Rambo doesn't volunteer to go, his friend gets captured, and now he's compelled to go, and it becomes a rescue mission. So it ended up working out really well that Sly came to me, and I was pretty honest with him about how a real veteran would react to that offer.
Right.
A real veteran who'd been through a lot of shit in the war would probably say, I don't think I can do this anymore. Okay, I've done enough of this. I'm out. Good luck to you, but I'm out. And that's what I brought to the table. And I think it worked out really well that Rambo is not just this gung-ho super soldier who's ready to go and blow people away at the drop of a hat.
Yeah, that's a great addition to the story, to have a little bit of friction there, like you're saying. What was it like collaborating with Sylvester Stallone? Was that intimidating to go into, or how was he to work with?
Well, I wouldn't say I was intimidated. I never really felt intimidated, but I just felt honored to be given the opportunity, because he was the biggest movie star in the world at that time. When they came to me with that offer, he was number one. He was number one at the box office everywhere in the world. So I was honored by that. As far as intimidation, yeah, I just didn't feel I felt comfortable with him.
Great.
So it worked out pretty well, and I would go off and do my writing, and then I'd send pages to him, and then he would do a lot of rewriting on top of my stuff, and he actually wrote a lot of the dialogue himself. I'm not all that great with dialogue. I'm really good with story, structure, action scenes. I pretty much wrote all the action scenes, but Sly did the majority of the dialogue himself. So yeah, so we got along. We got along just fine, but it was a long process writing that. Because even though we agreed on Afghanistan right away, we both said, yeah, it's got to be Afghanistan. He started getting cold feet about it, and then he came to me with another idea, which is to have Rambo go to Siberia, of all places. There's I forgot the exact circumstances, but he ends up going to Siberia, and he's pursued by some Russian special forces guy who's like known for hunting people down. Rambo basically, he got into Russia by crossing over the Bering Strait, which is a body of water that separates Alaska from Siberia, and it's only about 50 miles wide. So that's the closest point between the U.S. and Russia. And then to get back, once he's been discovered and once he's being chased, then he's got to get back to the Bering Strait so he can cross over those 50 miles and get back to Alaska.
Oh, wow.
So that was that was an alternate version. I didn't write a full screenplay, but I wrote a treatment for that. Eventually Sly came back to the Afghanistan idea. So we went with that.
Was there apprehension on Afghanistan? Because there was a James Bond movie just prior, The Living Daylights, where they had kind of had the Afghanistan subplot.
Wasn't that? No, that was afterwards, though. The Living Daylights, that was one with Timothy Dalton, correct?
Yeah, 1987.
No,
You guys were probably writing it and developing it probably when that movie was in development too. It's probably
correct.
One of those deals.
Yeah, we didn't. I don't recall hearing about that, but it's not like there was a race to be the first movie to take place during that Afghanistan war. But we had other issues too. They had hired a director who was Russell Mulcahy, and then we had a problem finding a place that could replicate Afghanistan where they could film the movie. And they sent Russell all over the world looking for locations. And early on, I had suggested to Sly, well, what about Israel? And his answer was, I ain't going to no Israel. You know, there's a lot of, it was a real war zone. You know, there's a lot of shit going on in Israel, which ended up being advantageous once they went there, because the Israelis had captured all this Soviet equipment, because the U.S. was supporting Israel with military equipment and money because the Soviets were supporting the Arabs. The Soviets were basically trying to get a foothold in the Middle East, so they were giving their tanks and jets and small arms. All this stuff was coming from the Soviet Union, and the reason that the U.S. got involved so heavily with Israel is just because they wanted to counter the Soviets in the Middle East. So all these other countries around Israel were getting Soviet equipment, the Israelis were heavily outnumbered, but they did a better job with the stuff that they were getting, and they were getting, well, we had better equipment also, but they managed to hold the Arabs at bay. But while they were holding them at bay, they were capturing a lot of stuff. So there was there were tanks and planes and everything else just sitting there, just kind of rusting away. So the production was able to use that stuff and basically set up a situation that looked like Afghanistan. And Israel, Afghanistan's, it's a big place, and it's got mountains, but it's also got deserts. They don't have mountains in Israel, but they have deserts. So they were able to realistically replicate Afghanistan over there. And like I said, they had all the equipment. Now that equipment would have been hard to get a hold of in other countries, but in Israel there was plenty of it available. So that worked out. So that was the decision they finally made, was to shoot in Israel. But meanwhile, Russell had been sent all over the world to scout locations. He was scouting locations in in the U.S. and in Canada. We got deserts there. The problem is we don't have the Soviet equipment. Not that they couldn't have gotten their hands on it, but it would have been very expensive. But in Israel, it was all just laying around. It was all just kind of warehoused. So that worked out pretty good.
Oh.
And then there were other issues too, where Russell ended up getting fired after just about I don't know, about 10 days of production. He got fired, and then the second unit director, Peter McDonald, took over.
Yeah, I think I heard that Stallone wasn't happy with the guards and the villains that Mulcahy had recruited. That they were kind of blonde hair, blue eyes, small guys. They didn't look very imposing, and they had a disagreement over that or something.
Oh, I never heard any of that. But basically, what I did hear from very reliable sources was that Peter was undermining Russell Mulcahy because he wanted to take over the job. He wanted to direct the movie himself. He did the same thing to me a few years later on a movie called Legionnaire. So
Oh wow.
that's really where that came from. It wasn't Stallone disagreeing about the kind of extras that they had picked. That's not true at all. See, I ended up working in Israel on a couple of movies, and one of them was a Dolph Lundgren movie called The Last Patrol.
That's right.
Yeah, and I worked on that one. Most of my crew had worked on Rambo III. So they were basically there. They had intimate knowledge of what was going on behind the scenes on Rambo III. And they all told me that Peter was just doing his damnedest to undermine Russell. And that's really why Russell got fired and why Peter took over. And
well, it's great to hear that you were behind the action scenes in Rambo 3, because I really think Rambo 3 has the best action out of any of the films in the series.
It does. It's got some great action scenes, and I got Peter's kind of a snake in the grass backstabber, but he's good. He's good at getting that action stuff. He did a really nice job on that, and of course. Stallone, and this also I heard from the crew, Stallone was basically directing that movie and just using Peter as the traffic cop to move things around. So Sly had a lot to do with Rambo 3. And he's a director himself. He's quite a good director.
Yeah.
But doing all that war stuff that's a lot of work. And Peter had done that before, so he was pretty adept at those kinds of scenes. So it all kind of worked out in the end. Didn't work out so well for Russell, but the movie does have some great action scenes, and a lot of people have told me that it surprised me, because for me, I like the second Rambo the best. Okay, I like the one that where he goes to Vietnam and has to rescue some POWs. There was a lot of great stuff in Rambo 2.
Mm-hmm.
That's my favorite of the series. But
those first three in particular, I mean, they're all great, and each one just kind of gets larger in scale.
All very different from one another.
Yeah.
But I've met plenty of people like you who think Rambo 3 is the best.
That scene where Stallone takes the machine gun and he runs over and he gets the machine gun and he starts shooting straight at that helicopter coming at him.
Right,
That's
yeah.
one of my favorite action scenes in the whole series.
It's a terrific scene. Well, there's a lot of good stuff like that in the film, but the whole attack on that Afghan camp with the helicopters, that's a pretty amazing scene. And there's a lot of great stuff in the film like that. The end of the film that takes place, they've got that tank versus helicopter scene, which I didn't write, and I don't think it's not a plausible scene at all. Like a tank versus a helicopter, this makes no kind of sense at all. but Sly pretty much set that up, and it kind of works. But that whole scene was shot in Yuma, Arizona. They were having some issues filming in Israel. There was a lot of friction there, and eventually they just decided to pull out and do that final battle scene in Arizona. So that's where that was filmed.
You were working with Jean Claude, or right before that. Was Jean Claude impressed when you saw him and you said, "Hey, I'm working with Sylvester Stallone on Rambo III"?
Yeah, he was very impressed by that.
I bet he was.
And